Hello, my name's Loraine Marshall, and this is another episode of my podcast, Mindset Money Success. Please like, comment, and share my content so more people can find my podcast. Today, I want to just talk about some of the situation I've been through in the last 4 years. This month, August 2024, is the 5th anniversary of what was an abrupt termination of a relationship I'd had. I had spent 11 years in a relationship, and I had no idea how that relationship had been toxic and one where there was many like ups and downs. I didn't really understand what emotional and psychological abuse was. I hadn't even a clue what coercive control meant. I had no idea that there was anything to do with narcissistic abuse. And it wasn't until the termination of the relationship that there was some intuition, because at that point in my mind, it was not to show emotions in front of the now ex-partner. And I remember on the very night, which was the 27th of August 2020, I walked away from where we were sitting on the porch of the villa in Spain. And I walked away and I went into the kitchen and I could feel the anger. I could feel it rising up inside of me. And at that point, I had my phone in my hand, and I remember tossing the phone down onto a glass table, and that phone bounced off the table and fell on the floor. And I very quickly then realised, oh, you need that phone. Now I picked it up, I walked through the house to the end bedroom. I got into that bedroom, and while I was there, I remember I let out some of that anger. I actually pushed my fist into a door frame at that point and repeated 3 times, "You bastard, you fucking bastard." Then I walked out of the bedroom, and a former partner was now in the lounge, sitting on one of the sofas. And I sat on the other sofa. And that night ended at about 4:30 in the morning, because I was talking about all of my past life events, and I was telling him how he was repeating mistakes of his past. And that was the very night that a thought came into my head, and that thought was, I'm going to write the story of the relationship I'd been in, the story of how we'd moved to Spain, and the story of how that relationship ended. Now, at that point of August 2020, I had no clue how things would unfold. And it was just 2 days later, on the 29th, that I was basically, he wrote a letter to me. He wanted to print that letter because I remember I was going out for the first time, and I was going to meet other people, and he wanted me to have some figures so I could think about his financial offer. And he was sitting in one of the rooms, which was an office, and he couldn't get the printer to work. He was practically begging me to help him to print off this thing. And I just looked and said, send it in an email. When I left the property, I went to another village. I had arranged to speak to an ex-GP, NLP, hypnotherapist who he had been with the weekend before he arrived back in Spain. He had had a 2-day intensive breakthrough transformational coaching with this practitioner. And to be honest, I couldn't see any transformation from where I was. And I wanted to find out what had happened. Of course, this practitioner couldn't speak to me about her client because it's client confidentiality. But on the 26th of August, the day before the termination of the relationship, my partner then had actually offered me the opportunity to have the same transformational therapy. And I remember thinking, why? Because the way he put his offer was, we could fly back to the UK and he would hire a car, book a hotel, and he would be there for me. So I could go through this transformation coaching. And my mind was like, why? I couldn't see that. And I think I actually said why, because he then said, so that I could have the success in business that I'd always wanted. Now, throughout the time I'd been in this relationship, I hadn't realized that I was in a situation where I was shelving things, starting off being really excited, wanting to do a business and go into training and meeting with other people who were in that line of business, and then wanting to start off and build up and change the business that I was already in, because I was running a business. I was running a property management business in my hometown city in the northeast of England. And it was a student rentals HMO property management business. And I was wanting to diversify, and I was wanting to build on what I'd already created. And the thing is, after the relationship ended, I realized that I'm non-confrontational and a bit of a people pleaser. And when he was, let's say, annoyed or frustrated, or even angry with me because I'd done something that he didn't agree with. So that was how, when I was wanting to move forward to do something to diversify the business that I had, that I was shelving things. And it wasn't until after the relationship ended that I actually found an email from 2014. And in that email, because I realized as well that there was no face-to-face meaningful conversations, because quite often there would be an email or there'd be text messages and no real conversations. So in this email, he's now telling me that my decision to invest in a database to help with my business was a wrong decision. And then he was bringing in finances and my situation and telling me all these negative things. Now, it might have been that he was trying to help and he couched it in certain words. But looking back, when I'd replied to his email, the first sentence of my response was, "You sounded angry." And he was. And that was how I became conditioned, because I'm non-confrontational and a people pleaser. And so whenever he was angry, I was reduced and I wouldn't go there again. It was like, okay, that's not good. You don't want to displease him. So therefore, you best not broach that subject again. You best not like do that. And so you basically are then what's controlled by the situation and the circumstances you find yourself in. So that was 2014. In 2015, there's decision to look at Spanish properties. He's made this decision. He wants to have a retirement property in Spain. And that was my dream as well. And so obviously I was like, oh, this is great, fantastic. And we end up coming to Spain and looking for properties and he puts down a deposit and the property falls through. So it wasn't until like, I think it must have been June of 2015 when we finally purchased the villa that I'm still living in at this point. And we realised that the property needed someone to be there a lot of the time, because you couldn't leave the house and go home for weeks and then come back, because the electricity supply in the countryside isn't very stable. You would get a thunderstorm and rains, and the rains would permeate the grounds, and then no electricity because it's gone off. And then all the things in your freezer have gone off, and you don't arrive back for weeks later, and then you realise you've just lost like a couple of €100 worth of frozen food. And so it's not easy when you start to look at how to move on and change your life. It's never straightforward. There's always things that challenge you as a person. And so it was 2016 when I was basically given the task of overseeing the construction of a pool that was to be built in the grounds opposite the house. And we travelled out and in my car, so I had a vehicle, and I stayed while he moved backwards and forwards to the UK. And everything seemed okay. I never realised that things were going on in the background until later in the relationship. And like I said, it's very difficult while you're in a relationship to see red flags. And I didn't see the red flags until afterwards. And so when I wrote and published my book, which I wrote and published under a pen name to protect the people who I was going to actually write about, because I had to change the names of my partner, the other women who were involved, and the lawyers that gave advice. So now, with it being this 5th anniversary of the termination of the relationship, I am looking at relaunching my first book and creating the audible version of that book so that more people can see the situation that I have been through and that other women actually go through and do not understand. The UK law talks about coercive, controlling behaviour, yet it can be very subtle and insidious, and you quite often don't understand while you're in a relationship, and then it hits you after the relationship ends. And quite often the person who has been your partner, you see a different side to that person. And I just basically looked, I thought it was because of the transformational coaching that he had gone through. But I don't think it was. I think there was this angry man inside all of the time. And the other side of that person was the little lost child, which came out every now and again. And I now realise the situation I'd been in, and it took me months to even get to a point where I could start to actually write my first book. It was April of 2021 when I outlined the chapters, and I published in May 2022. And the date of publishing was just 2 weeks before I would be stood in a civil court for a verbal hearing on precarious eviction, because the house and all of the utilities were in his name, and my name didn't appear on the deeds of a property. And I had no marriage certificate. I had no legal certificate to say I was living with this person. And so I found myself in Spain, precarious, in September of 2020 when he left, with all of these future faking false promises of 50% of the property value, because the property was going to be sold, help with moving to another house so I could have another property unencumbered, and my other house in the UK, which was rented, would be paid off with a sum of money, and that would have been a stable form of income. None of that happened. I have been through 2 litigations, the civil court for the precarious eviction, and then the criminal court, because I dared to tell the truth in a book that I self-published, and the former partner claimed defamation, revealing secrets, harassment, slander, misappropriation, theft, and damages, which his lawyer in Barcelona had written into the court documents he requested maximum penalties. And when I went through that list and added up those maximum penalties, it came to 17 years of prison. Luckily, after the first hearing in September of 2023, it took a few months, December 2023, for the court and the judge in the criminal case to dismiss 5 of the allegations. And so now the only allegations in the criminal court are the defamation and the damages. I am hoping for an acquittal, but nothing is certain in my life, apart from I am still doing videos on my channels. I'm still putting out posts, and I'm rewriting my first book, and I'm starting the second book, which will be the sequel to the first book. And I will leave the links to my content below this podcast video and in the show notes for the Audible versions. So this is my podcast for today. Please like, subscribe, share the content to allow more people to find other episodes of my podcast. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.